And we are live. We will start at 5:35. Okay, let's begin. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the second edition of the PDU workshop. So, before we start with our lecture, let's give a few reminders first. For those who haven't seen it yet, or if you are watching and you want to share it to your friends, the link is up on the Philippine Debate Union FB page. Um, and please share it, disseminate it so that other people may watch the lecture with you. If you are going to participate in the stream, please respect the rules of equity and be respectful in the chat. Also, please notice that there is a stream delay between our Zoom call and your stream. So if you do wish to ask questions, please expect a bit of time before we are able to receive them and forward them here to the lecturer. With that out of the way, let's introduce our lecturer. So, he is notorious for the Philippine debate circuit because of his very knowledgeable brain on a lot of things. He reached the open semis of UADC and in the same year became the national champion of the Philippines in PIDC of 2016. He's also a two-time national finalist and a top 10 best speaker in NDC 16 and 17, and he was also an open quarterfinals judge in Australs 2019. Without further ado, it is my honor to present to you all Miguel Ventura.
Hey, Tim, so do you see the other applications or no?
No, I don't. We don't
So,
see.
so you don't see that I'm on my emails right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Hi everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'm not sure how long this will take. I hope it doesn't take 2 hours. I don't think it will take 2 hours anyway. Um, so what I was asked to do was just give a lecture on matter. Not entirely sure what it was. This lecture is purely personal in my views, and I think what I think is important for the circuit. How do I do this? Nice. Okay. Oh God. All right. So this is basically going to be the theme of our lecture. I hope you guys still watched Adventure Time. Um, Basically, what we are going to do is that most likely you're only going to have an approximate knowledge of many things in your debate career. You're not going to know everything, and even if you do, that's still not going to be enough to win you this debate. But what we are going to talk about today is how you can use that approximate knowledge to the best of your advantage, not only in rounds but even for matter loading. Why those things are going to be important. So how do I? God, I hate the technology. So this is basically the structure of my lecture today. Firstly, I'm going to talk about why matter or matter loading is important for any debater. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why using how to use matter in your arguments or speeches. Lastly, I'm going to talk about how you should be adjudicating matter battles as if you were a judge. Feel free to ask questions at any time. I'm not on YouTube, or no, I can't see the YouTube stream anyway. So I mean, I'm not going to be able to catch them on time. Just ask them whenever. A few disclaimers before I go on. Firstly, this is not going to be a lecture on specific matter to learn. So if you came here expecting me to talk about specific topics like economics or geopol or whatever, I'm sorry. That's not going to be happening here. I may reference them in examples or questions that you want to ask, but we were not going to be devoting too much time to that. Secondly, I am firstly old, and secondly out of the meta. What does this mean? So obviously with age comes experience, but I haven't been too active already. I've done like one debating tournament this year. The previous tournament was 2019. And then I've done a few judging stints here and there, but basically I'm not as active as like an actual college debater now or someone who judges in the regular. So some of these thoughts might be a bit outdated or specific to the context I was most active in. So take these with a grain of salt. But lastly, and I think most importantly, it's not going to be my job to study for you. So I can only guide you to certain techniques or certain mindsets for how to matter load or how to deploy matter in a round. But it's not going to be my job to digest that matter for you or figure out like why certain things are going to be important for debate. All right, so let's get to the first section. Why matter, right? Just to be clear, when we're talking about matter for this lecture, we're going to be talking about the facts and specific knowledge. Obviously, in the general debating, matter refers to any kind of analysis or argumentation that you are going to be using in a round. That's the broader definition. We're only going to be talking about matter as it pertains to specific knowledge or frameworks that you might be aware of, depending on the topic of the motion. So these can include things like news items, academic findings or studies that you would find in your course, or frameworks that you would find from different industries or disciplines studying the topics that you think are going to be relevant. Firstly, I think we have to talk about why using matter generally sucks. And this is the more personal part of the lecture, so don't mind me ranting, right? What we have in the debate in debating, if you aren't aware already, although I think you should be, is that we have what's called the ordinary intelligent voter assumption, or otherwise known as the average reasonable person or the globally informed citizen. To quote directly from the World's Technical Manual, updated as of Cape Town, 2019, they do not read technical journals, specialist literature, or the like. They are, in short, a smart person who has a good deal of knowledge that is broad rather than deep. Why is that important? It means that in as much as you can try showing off that you have specific knowledge or very deep knowledge about a particular field, which just so happens to relate to the motion at hand, that is not going to be immediately digestible or appreciated by the judge, and it's not supposed to be. The judge is probably going to be smart enough, or what's that word? Optimistically speaking, the judge is going to be able to be smart enough to understand why that matter is important if you are able to explain them. But on face value, any piece of matter or information you just launch without explaining or substantiating is as good as any kind of assertion or even a false fact, right? So why else does using matter suck? Judges obviously cannot fact check unless something is obviously false, like someone says that Rodrigo Duterte is not currently the president. That is obviously false. If there is an info slide supplied by the adjudication core for that motion, then obviously they can check that. But even in some scenarios where there is an info slide, it is still somewhat the burden of debaters to explain and substantiate the impact of that information based on the arguments they are going to launch. Furthermore, oh dear, what did I do that? Furthermore, examples aren't going to be the same as analysis. As we're going to be discussing later, it's analysis that proves examples rather than the other way around. So unfortunately, people who like to matter vomit, just like me, are forced to the little problem called actually explaining their arguments rather than just dropping matter into the panel. So you are still going to have to put in the efforts to actually make an argument rather than just name dropping or statistics dropping it around. But lastly, I think what is most frustrating, because it encompasses all possible tournaments and not just the specific round you are using, what you think is important enough to matter load is not necessarily what ad score is going to matter load. So like personally, I competed in Proxime in August very recently. Literally everything I matter loaded for the tournament did not come out. I think it's a phenomenon you might have encountered before. There are certain things that you spend like nights researching, collaborating with org mates, but it just so happens that in the tournament you wanted to use them in, they just didn't happen. And that can happen for a number of reasons. Maybe the things that you were researching are too specific. Maybe you just weren't able to read ad score right, which is something we'll have to discuss later. So there are all these compounding reasons as to why matter loading using matter in a round might not be particularly effective, because there are so many hurdles. You still have to argue. You cannot rely on the judges to fact check things unless they are extremely obvious, and sometimes even your preparations might be for naught. So why should you use matter, or why should you even matter load to begin with if there are all these hurdles? I think there are two things that you might want to take away from, if nothing else, from this lecture. Firstly, I think this forces you to discipline yourself when it comes to preparations for tournaments, right? So you're not going to know everything. At best, you might have an approximate knowledge of many things, but I think knowing that limitation disciplines you with how you are going to matter load. So it's not just a matter of plopping down in front of a laptop and Googling every news article or every journal article and then cramming them the night before the tournament, although that's obviously going to happen. But it is also about disciplining how you plan out your matter loading sessions, how you identify information that you need to actually matter load before a tournament, and how you think you are going to be able to use them in tournaments. But secondly, I think the most important use of matter is to focus your arguments and context. I think a lot of times when debaters are told that their arguments aren't impacted as well, or they aren't grounded enough, it's not because the argument is wrong per se, or it's not that the argument wasn't well proven. It's just that maybe for the judge in particular, it wasn't immediately clear, or it wasn't completely apparent why the actors or contexts you identify in this argument are important to the motion to begin with. I think having matter and knowing the most pertinent parts of a motion or a topic or a series of events forces you to focus the certain actors and certain impacts that you have to be able to launch in your 7-minute speech. So again, it's to discipline your own preparatory habits. And secondly, it's to focus your argumentation and responses in an actual speech. Okay, so I just want to read out this statement that I found in a philosophy class way back in college. As a disclaimer, I do not support the Iraq War or the War on Terror. It just so happens that the person I'm quoting was the U.S. Secretary of Defense when this entire thing was launched. I think we can probably distance the context from this quote, right? So I read the quote: because as we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know, but there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know. So that was Donald Rumsfeld. He was one of the Secretary of Defenses under George Bush. What does this mean? So, oh, why did I duplicate slides? Anyway, there are four kinds, like, just to jump into the philosophy of knowledge that I want to use here, there are four kinds of knowledge that we are dealing with here. Firstly, these are your known knowns or your current knowledge base. Alam mo na you are aware of these things. And these are usually things, especially if you're in college or in a particular strand in high school, this is your course material. These are your interests. These are the things that you are very interested in knowing about. So of course, you know that these are your specialties. Secondly, what you have are what you call the known unknowns. Alam mo that you don't know these things. And usually these are your weak points. These are things like, oh, I'm not very well aware of feminism, or I'm not very good at art, or I'm not very good at geopol. You know that you have a lack of specific knowledge in those things, and maybe that's why you think you have a particular weakness. Thirdly, you have things which are your unknown unknowns. You don't know that you don't know them. So this is just generally the default state of things. You just don't know a lot of things about the world, and you want to be able to fix that. But lastly, you have your things which are called unknown knowns. You don't know that you know these things, or you don't know that this is what you think you know. And these could be a number of things. These could be your biases. These are things these are things where you think you have a working knowledge of them, but it turns out you have a very faulty sense of knowledge. So for example, you might think you're a hotshot in geopolitical economics, but if you actually talk to a professor or someone who actually worked in the field, it might just be that what you thought you knew are false facts or broad oversimplifications or things that generally have been discarded in that field. So you technically know those things, but you're not aware that that's the kind of knowledge that you have. Why is this important? Why is this not just a philosophy class? Although I think philosophy is also important, right? I think these are important steps to be able to discipline your matter loading, right? The first step is to actually take stock of your knowledge. What does your degree specialize in? What has your strand in high school dealt with? What are the things that interest you? If you're able to take stock of your knowledge, then obviously these are things which are already focused on. You probably can like recite the base of knowledge of these things in your sleep. So maybe you shouldn't have to focus too much on these things already. There's a diminishing marginal return on trying to learn things that you already know. I think the second step to matter loading is that you want to take stock of your weak points. So these are things you think are your weak points, right? These are topics that you dislike, topics that you avoid. Like, for example, there seems to be this perennial, I wouldn't say fear, distaste for some of the harder quote unquote harder motions in the local circuit, such as geopolitics, economics, science, which I don't think should be the case. As debaters, you should have very general and broad base of knowledge. But okay, we are dealt that hand. So figure out what you don't know about these things. If you don't like economics, what is it about economics that you aren't able to understand? How are you able to learn about these things? I mean, understanding what information you lack is the first step to actually addressing it. If you're just going to say, "Oh, I don't know a lot about geopolitics. I don't know a lot about economics. I don't know a lot about art," then you're just making the problem worse because you're leaving all these things as unqualifiable, very scary, big unknowns when you can easily chop them down into manageable bits. Like, I don't know XYZ concepts in art. I don't know these concepts in economics. If you can identify and if you can verbalize what things you want to learn about, then they don't become as scary, and you can actually make steps to plan out your matter loading sessions for them. For the third one, unknown unknowns, things that you just don't know, right? Just keep an open mind. There is no easy step around this. I would just ask you to read more in general or learn more in general. So watch your YouTube videos, listen to your podcasts, read your books or your long form articles, especially long form. I think those are very important in understanding the discipline of making arguments and doing research, right? Like, just generally keep an open mind. Um, I know that we've been going on about trying to structure matter loading sessions, but sometimes there really are just things that you have to learn in a natural process and not force. So just keep an open, just understand that this is a journey and not necessarily a destination. It's about enjoying the time reading and learning about things. Debating is not just the sum total of information that you bring to the ground. But lastly, and I think this is a very important step to make sure you can reinforce all the things that you will learn in your matter loading sessions. Are you really as well read as you think? So again, for me, even if I was an economics major and I'm currently working in an economics agency of the government, I always have to revisit. Wait a minute, do I understand these particular concepts about market competition? Are these the kinds of models that are applicable when we are talking about regulations or industry, or do I need to read more? I think one of the fatal flaws of most debaters is that they start assuming that they are experts in certain fields, which leads to a number of things. It locks them off from fields you're not currently expert at, so they develop these fears or these inhibitions of becoming good at topics, or even say that, X topic is my bait. I don't want to debate this. I don't want to face X debater in this topic because I know they're better than I know they're better than me. But it also makes them blind to the kinds of information that people might be learning about in the topics they think they're good at. So you might think you're good at geopol, you might think you're good at art, and if you stop reading about it, if you stop trying to reinforce that knowledge base, then anyone who's just hungrier and wants to learn more about the topics can and potentially will be able to overtake you in the knowledge base they can bring to a debate. So, on a brief summary, take stock of your knowledge, take stock of your weak points, read more in general, and revisit your knowledge base every now and then. Uh, so, like, what are the things I would do? Because a lot of people ask me what sources they do. Quite honestly, I don't matter load as much anymore. I get most of my news on Twitter or Facebook. But if I were to be more serious again, I'd firstly say read more. So really, download a international news app. Like, for example, BBC has its news app. You can customize the kinds of news topics that you want to get updates on. I would highly suggest you start reading more long form content. So stop reading hot take tweets or Twitter threads. I don't think those are very good sources of information consistently. You want to discipline yourself by reading actual articles or actual thought pieces that are focused on a central thesis, that have to work within paragraphs and topic sentences, and constantly reference the material within the text. I think those discipline you not only to read for a debate, but can help you for, especially if your course is very research heavy. It could help you in the long run, like maybe with grad school or work in general. Secondly, I would ask you to watch more. So that's not only an extension of content. I think there's a lot of good YouTube videos or online sites or podcasts to listen to. But if specifically you want to get good at debate, like debating techniques, there's so much content available now online that there's no excuse for you to say, I have no access to online content, unless you have very bad internet, which is like honestly one of the biggest problems you have right now, other than crushing poverty and a pandemic. But right, so like for example, this European debate training centers on YouTube is completely available. At least 56 videos are in its playlist. I'm pretty sure there's a few dozen more, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot more YouTube channels hosting so many debate rounds and breakdowns from high-level tournaments like Worlds, EUDC, ABP, Australs, etc. So really, it's just a matter of exploring. And if you are going to look for a specific topic or motion, I'm pretty sure I can just Google the motion and a related round is going to pop up. But lastly, and I think this cannot be overstated, you really have to talk more, right? You have to talk more with your teammates. You have org mates that only allow one person to speak in a team. You are going to be, hello? You are going to be speaking with at least one more partner. Maybe in Asians, it's two more. Um, and part of team dynamics is understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses. So don't rely on yourself to just get all the information you think you have. Talk with your different org mates, talk with people from different fields and different colleges and different strands, figure out the information you guys can plan with each other and research with each other, and you will be able to grow your broad knowledge. Um, I really think here that organizations, if they do this correctly, are greater than the sum total of their members, right? If you can work out a system and work out a culture where people are unafraid to share information, no matter how meandering or how useless it seems at the time, then I really think debating in general in the Philippines will become very empowering, even if you are not a top debater. But okay, this is the last part before I go to the how you actually use how you actually use it in arguments. Um, Reminder, this is a reminder. There's no guarantees, right? This is how I would think about it, or if I had to explain it. Uh, how you how you connect the dots, so to speak, with information that you gather will differ from person to person. I'm not here to impose a method of thinking or a method of knowledge accumulation. But these are some of the questions I usually ask when I'm trying to matter load. Firstly, and I think maybe a good first step is, does this inform me of a certain series of events? So this is a bit gamey, but since there is always going to be an edge core that is going to set a motion, then most likely they are going to be looking at certain topics or certain news events that are going to inform their motions. So um, very simply asking if this will bring you up to date to something happening across the world, it's actually a very powerful question. If it enables you to form a timeline between events and the people involved in those events, then it can already prevent you from getting blindsided by, oh, why did AdScore set this motion? Did something happen? Oh, why are they saying this now? Did something change with this kind of topic? Then I think that's a very powerful tool. Secondly, maybe this is my interpretation of the so-called structural reasons that everyone is using now. I can't really say anything about that, but maybe people would be able to argue these more or be able to rebut these more if they are aware of the particular structures or mechanisms of the things they're debating. Like, what are the political structures I am going to learn about if I'm reading this article? What are the mechanisms or devices or technologies that I am now aware of if I listen to this podcast? What are the ways that people or organizations interact with these things? If you're able to learn those things from the material you are consuming, then you're more likely to be able to argue structural reasons, because you can understand that, okay, you can start from point A, you can go through processes XYZ, and you're going to get to point B because of these things. You're not going to spend so much time in prep and arguing anymore that, oh, people live in this place, what do they want to do? No, you already know these things because of the structures that they are affected by. But lastly, I think a question I like asking is, does this inform me of specific individuals that affect these events or mechanisms, right? So a lot of times I see in debates that, oh, we're talking about the moderates or liberals versus conservatives. We're talking about the most vulnerable actor. We're talking about certain specific cases without really explaining why, right? I think the reason for that is people might have a good idea of the general cases just by reading very casually, but without more serious and more focused matter loading, they're unable to identify certain exceptions to the rule, or certain special cases might actually be driving or changing those trends. So being able to ask, okay, um, do the events or mechanism that this person I'm reading about, are these things that affect them generally? Are these things that affect them specifically? What is the difference? Why is this thing not as widespread or as widespread as it's going to be? From there, you're able to parse out information or parse out arguments and say, okay, this actually happens on a broader spectrum versus, oh, this thing actually only affects a small part, but we're still going to say why it's impactful. So again, no guarantees about what kinds of questions you need to ask. This is how I personally would approach it. Oh, yeah. So like very quickly, how do I use it in debate? When people say rigor of analysis, which I think is a very weird jargon, right? I think what people really mean, or what I think people ought to mean, is that on some balance of probabilities, how predominant are the series of events and actions described by my argument? I think that's what judges are really looking for anyway, or at least I hope they are, right? Because I don't know, I'm a bit out of practice. But anyway, I think that's why matter is really important, right? Like, obviously, you're still going to have to argue through facts and logics about why your argument is more likely to happen. But I think the use of matter in debates is that by knowing specific events and mechanisms, you can already circumscribe the set of possible incentives and actions by the motion's actors, right? You can parse out unique cases, or you can enable explanations of otherwise complex or counterintuitive courses of actions. So, for example, a lot of people don't like economics motion because they don't understand finance. Like, oh, what does this instrument do? Oh, what does the market do? Um, and I think that prevents them from pursuing quote unquote rigor of analysis, because even if they understand that certain outcomes have to be explained in their argument, they aren't really sure on how to focus certain probabilities or certain incentives. And that's why matter loading on, I say, how does the financial system work? How do people pay off debts? How do people change their economic incentives? I think that allows a greater imagination of, okay, if we know this mechanism governs the set of actions, what are the sets of possible incentives that they're going to take? If it's about financial regulation, if I know that X financial regulation exists, that allows me to limit or expand the possible incentives of economics actors. Really, it's just um, I think what overwhelms a lot of people, especially when they don't know things, it's not so much as they don't know anything about the topic. I think ad scores obviously try to prepare for accessibility, especially in preliminaries. I think what's more problematic for people is that given that they think they don't know anything, there's just literally an entire universe of arguments, of context, of premises to choose from. And because they don't know the matter that is most relevant to this motion, then they really don't know what to pick with these arguments. I think knowing the matter allows you to really focus your prep time and really focus what arguments you want to launch. Okay, so using matter in speeches, this will actually be relatively short because I don't want to delve into specific examples too much. Um, so let's just revisit the basic argument structure. You've all seen this in your introductory debate classes or whatever. It's premise, then analysis, example, and conclusions, then so what. But if you recall, a premise is a fact or information that describes a quality or characteristic of the actor or event to be analyzed. So as we just discussed, I think having matter or examples can allow you to narrow or broaden the debate or dictate priority outcomes of incentives, because you're already selecting and pruning the different premises that you want to be able to use. And not only allows you to argue the thing faster, assuming your judge is willing to appreciate the content, but it also allows you to impact these arguments more effectively. So these are some questions I asked. So firstly, obviously, what is the motion about? Like, you can't make a good argument if you're off the definition or if you don't know certain examples. Ad scores usually try adding in parentheses or side or even info slides about these basic definitions if they think it's inaccessible. This might cause you a bit of embarrassment at times, but honestly, it is better to err on the side of caution and just ask your ad score what the definition is or example if it is still unclear. Maybe once or twice, or I don't know, several times, you might get an ad score that isn't as compassionate to you, but it is better to go through that experience versus like literally not knowing the right definitions or examples, especially if you're OG. Tapos yun pala, all three other teams know the basic definitions because they had bothered to ask. Secondly, are there particular events being referred to? So again, a bit gamey, but you do want to put yourselves in ad score shoes. There's a reason they set that motion now of all times. Beyond the fact that maybe it's a semis and they want to screw some people over, maybe it's a round four and they just want to make a clean bubble, right? You might want to look back and see if certain things have happened in the world to see if they might want to talk about this motion. Thirdly, what systems are being affected. So especially if this is a policy motion or this house would motion, then obviously this is one like small item in what might be a larger system of policies or incentives that are available to actors. And so you want to be able to ask, okay, if I do this to a system, how does it affect all the other moving parts of the system? And lastly, what are the actors involved usually like? Like what are the kinds of incentives or interests that you would usually expect? From there, you can insert matter that, oh, okay, if I do this policy, these actors are likely to do this instead. We know this for a fact because this has happened somewhere in history or etc. So like what I would usually do is, I think essentially most arguments can be boiled down to, uh, there's a certain system or actor, and they are usually characteristics ABC. We know this because of analysis with where you provide your examples, and then obviously the motion is going to is more like will make them more likely to do actions EFG again because of reasons with examples. And finally, you conclude that this is good or bad because of reasons. So let's just demonstrate very quickly. We can do more of these if you ask questions. Firstly, so I just got this from Hello Motions. Take this with a grain of salt. Like I was just like, I wouldn't say cramming. I would just say it's really off the top of my head. Firstly, this House believes that judges in the Supreme Court should be elected directly by the American people. So let's go through the questions. Firstly, what Supreme Court are we even talking about, or which judges are we talking about? Like, I'm not sure if some of you are aware, but in America, each state has their own Supreme Court. So this might be a bit of a nitpicky point, but most likely the motion is talking about the federal Supreme Court or SCOTUS. I'm not sure if you want to expand that to each and every of the 50 states' own Supreme Courts. I'm not sure about the strategic concern, but that's something that if you had matter, would be a choice for you to expand or narrow the debate depending on the Supreme Court you might want to talk about. Secondly, what events might have made this motion relevant? So if I decided to set this now, like say it's October, it's the start of October, and I want to talk about electing judges, why would I want to set a motion about judges in the US Supreme Court? Maybe, I don't know, maybe a judge died, maybe someone is about to be selected, maybe, I don't know. There's a whole plethora of events that could have influenced me to set this. But likely, if you're able to identify that event or that particular item, then you are likely drawing on the same matter that AdJCOR used to conceive of the motion. And since AdJCORs generally want, especially in preliminaries, as much accessibility for topics, then likely the consequences or the incentives that the matter has informed them about will also be the same matter, the same consequences, and the same incentives that you should be able to build as a regular debater. The third question is, how are Supreme Court judges even selected to begin with, or which government structures are responsible? So I could be wrong. Again, I didn't matter load for this. As I understand it, the US president selects a particular candidate. It's the job of Congress to appoint them. I'm not sure if it's the same in the Philippines. Could be, probably isn't. But I think that's important because the motion is talking about whether we should elect them versus whatever the system currently is now. And especially at government, you cannot make a good comparison between holding judges electable versus whatever status quo is if you have no idea what status quo is. I think this is also a good illustration of what an unknown known is. Like, you might have a preconceived notion of how judges are currently selected in the United States, but if you're unable to properly verbalize and elaborate on that during your speech, then it turns out you actually didn't know that, or maybe you had a wrong conception of that kind of selection process. And that's obviously problematic if you want to make a clear comparison for the judge. But lastly, so obviously this house believes that this is a general comparison of interests, especially in the lens of the American people, or at least the lens of the American people is one of the more important parts. So just asking yourselves, why would government or people be invested in this process? Like talking about those different incentives and identifying them will allow you to better focus your argument. So let's see how we can use that. So first question. So a general argument for government, again, top of my head, This is good because subjecting judges to the electoral process controls how polarized issues can get. The first step or the premise is we know that judge selections tend to be very partisan because it is held by executive power. So this is where you bring in matter. Right now, it is presidential appointment subject to the current Congress or Senate's appointment. I'm not particularly sure. Again, if you did not know that structure, then you wouldn't be able to focus on, oh, okay, there might be a problem with the electoral process. I mean, with the current process and status quo. The second step is we know that they are partisan, or we know that certain problem exists because of how the executives and legislators' laws and orders are affected by judicial review and ruling. Like me as president or me as the legislative branch of the US government will get affected if I am not sure that a set of judges or a particular judge will be ruling in favor of the things I want to pass. So again, this is where we can insert matter. That's why Merrick Garland's appointment during 2016 was highly contested by the Republican Senate. The official excuse being that, oh, it's an election year, it shouldn't be Barack Obama, but instead the next president that should be able to fill up the slot that was left open by Justice Scalia dying. We also see that now with Brett Kavanaugh's appointment issues during 2018, with the testimony by Dr. Christine Blasey. I'm sorry if I got her name wrong. Clearly, this was not only a question of is a judge representative of certain ideals, but whether or not this person has particular moral character. The third step of this is, okay, if we know that these are the incentives and these are the current approaches of the actors we think are important in this debate, then by doing the motion, which is electing them directly by the American people, then something is going to change. Maybe the argument is if we subject judge positions to open elections, then maybe your executives and legislators will tend to become less partisan about it, or at least cannot use their partisan powers as maliciously as right now, because it's no longer under direct control. Plus, those judges hold direct mandate from people. So maybe this is a bit more technical. Maybe the matter I would use here is median voter theory. If judges want to win the largest possible mandate, then they are going to go into the medium of the median or the moderate, for lack of a better word, set of political ideals that are currently held by the American people. And this is comparatively better than waiting to get appointed by a president who might be currently opposed by their Senate or Congress, so that is already another partisan political issues, or just in general, maybe people resent it, especially the side that lost the elections. They resent it when there is a full Congress and a full presidential power that is against their party that is able to stuff the Supreme Court. So they have to wait for the next election of the president before it happens. And I'm sure that leaves them very resentful versus, actually being able to influence those elections. So the conclusion of that is this is a good thing, or this change in actions and incentives by the matter we introduced is a good thing because we want the electorate to believe all of government is directly accountable to them. Plus, this is a balance of power. So I don't know, you can maybe talk about how right now it's only 2 of 3 of of a democracy branches that are directly elected by people. We see no reason as to why we shouldn't include the judiciary. It's probably helpful if everyone's selected by the people in a democracy. Again, this is just the top of my head, but I hope I was able to illustrate how matter can punctuate or focus a certain argument and show why certain incentives matter more than others. Okay, what if my opponent has more matter than me, right? This is a question that really depends, because it depends on how much they really know more about you, right? Like they could be like literal experts or lawyers in the field, or maybe they just happen to read one more article the night before the tournament than you. I think there are 3 things you need to do. The first and most important is, firstly, don't panic, right? At the end of the day, like the amount of matter isn't going to be important if those opponents aren't able to substantiate the actual argument more. So they can launch a ton of statistics, they can launch a ton of history factoids, but unless they are able to communicate to the judge properly the trends or set of incentives that govern those events, then those are as good as any assertion you can pull out of your ass 14 minutes into prep, right? What matters now is that you are giving a speech. You need to be able to maintain every advantage you have. If you think that by the side of the motion, although in theory all motions are balanced, if you think that you have an advantage by having a side that is easier to intuitively argue the moral high ground, or it's very easy. It's more easy to identify the impacts on your side than assert that advantage altogether. That is something the judge will have to consider anyway. It is still the judge's burden to suss out matter if it is important in the debate or not. Which leads us to the second thing. You just want to be able to improve your analysis. Again, probability is the name of the game. If you are unable to prove to the judge that on a balance of probabilities, your arguments are more likely, or your arguments are more, if you're able to prove to the judges that on a balance of probabilities, your arguments or your impacts are more important and more likely to the debate, then it doesn't matter how much technically the matter is on their side. Because the matter can be on their side, but if it only happens for a small set of events, or if it happens for an aspect of the debate that everyone has agreed is not as important, then that doesn't matter because they're not hitting the most impactful part of the debate. But lastly, and this is the refuge of the lost, even ifs are your friend. So again, this is both the good and bad thing about BP and Asians debating. Your judge cannot fact check, but you want to go the extra step, right? See, even if the matter that your opponent is explaining is correct, why is it that certain arguments or certain analysis is still going to be more important and favorable to your side? So that's where you really want to be as comparative as possible. I don't mean to say that you should go to the extreme and defend, oh, we're going to defend all of this, or we're going to defend the worst part. They have to defend the best part of this. I think we can be reasonable with the burden pushes we put, right? We can be reasonable with the kinds of comparisons that matter. I don't think we should be uh, winning debates just because we claim to be defending an extreme extension of the motion, but in reality, you're just rehashing arguments, right? What I think is most important is being able to categorically explain the different outcomes or different probabilities that will happen with a set of actors and show why you're still able to win a measurable impact on your side. Okay, so again, if you have questions, just feel free to. I actually have no way to check the chat. Yeah, whatever. Just feel free to message them on YouTube, right?
Yep.
Uh, Anyways, well, this is the last part. How do you how what are the responsibilities of a judge, right? There's not actually very, at least for me, I don't think there's too many special responsibilities. I think a lot of times I think this is really just a reiteration of basic judge responsibilities. First and foremost, and this really cannot be overstated. This is still a problem, at least for me. Read the motion and info slide if there is. Uh, why is this important? So I tell this to the people I coach or I used to coach. I don't know. A lot of times, a lot of your problems are going to go away if you can just read the motion and think about like, wait a minute, what is this motion asking me to defend? What is the most reasonable clash here? Um, and I think that also applies for judges. I don't think judges should be intimidated by these highly technical motions or motions they think are outside of their usual expertise. It is the job of debaters and not you to argue why emotions should judge or should pass or fall. Um, and it also, but it is still their job technically to understand what the basic premises of the motion are. So especially if there's an info slide, I think you do have some liberty to adjudicate whether or not some information is factual, or even if it is not immediately obvious what the truth value is. Having an info slide and understanding its implications allows you more latitude in weighing out the different likelihoods that debaters are trying to do. Secondly, listen to the arguments. So this is more my personal gripe, right? But obviously, it is the burden of debaters to explain to the communicate their judges in the most efficient way possible. That being said, if judges are afraid or judges are hesitant because they think the motion is highly technical, what more for the debaters that actually have to debate it, right? So I think judges should be, well, this applies as a general rule, right? But judges should be very industrious when trying to listen to the arguments. They have to be able to follow the specific outcomes that they want, even if it isn't phrased the best way, especially in highly technical rounds where some people more than others might be struggling to explain the technical stuff. That helps in matter battles, especially for salty teams. I don't know, because if you're able to explain, if you're able to listen better, you're able to understand the extent that an argument was able to fulfill its logical burdens. You're able to understand where exactly they fell short in their comparison, And by extension, you're able to show, wait a minute, was the matter they were trying to spout actually helpful? Or does it still leave the argument short? I think a lot of teams feel hostile, and I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing, although it could be a bad thing because teams shouldn't be hostile. I think they're hostile at times because they didn't think a judge was able to correctly weigh out the matter or correctly weigh out the impacts of their arguments. And that can really just be solved if judges put a bit more effort, always put a bit more effort to understanding what the argument is about. But lastly, be clear with your standards. So uh, don't just rely on, oh, it's depth of analysis or it was more comparative. Like actually explain it, right? I think debaters and I think panels would also appreciate if you were actually clear with what you are comparing or what kind of rigor you wanted from an argument. So when you say you wanted a more rigorous analysis, did you want more sets of examples for where this argument is taking place? Did you want a more comprehensive set of incentives or interests of the actors you're talking about? Did you want a more clear discussion of the impact of the argument? Like, just be explicit with what you're trying to compare. And I think even if matter battles cannot be resolved because it's a very technical motion, and I think teams will still be able to appreciate that you took the burdens to apply them to standards that everyone was able to agree with. So yeah, as we were just saying, it is still the debater's responsibility to explain a balance of probabilities of arguments. Um, but you still, as a judge, you do want to weigh out the relevance and dynamics of arguments where the matter was or was not deployed. In other words, even if argument X is proven, if you were to say include a piece of matter that was mentioned or exclude a piece of matter that was mentioned in the debate, how does it affect the argument's impact in the debate? Like, okay, maybe this argument has very good analysis and very good grounding. Like, does it really become endangered just because an opponent is able to launch this one example that may or may not be grounded? If so, then if it's true that it will be endangered, then you're going to have to explain what specific parts of the opponent's arguments are able to endanger opponent's analysis. Or if a person left out a specific example in their argument, does that prevent you from believing the argument's probability or rigor of analysis? If so, then it might not be actually a function of the matter itself, but simply because the way that the argument was discussed was just so unclear and so inefficient that it's really hard to compare or identify what the main crux of the argument is. So what I'm really saying is so much of matter battles can really be sussed out if you're just able to identify the underlying logic and underlying comparison that arguments make or do not make. So this is my hot take, right? And this is more of the personal ranty part of my long time in the debate career. But I do think that matter and analysis, so there still has to be an argument, matter and analysis that significantly improves a similar argument from opening can qualify as an important extension, right? So I don't mean to say that, oh, there's going to be an opening that says, oh, they had one line for analysis. If you try to improve it, like by actually making the argument, then it's a rehash, right? I obviously don't think that's the case. But I think there can be extensions where there can be openings where it's not entirely clear what the main policies or main incentives are going to be. And even if they're able to identify the basic burdens or the basic impacts in opening, it is not entirely clear, even after opening, what is going to be more likely. You just know that, okay, these effects can happen. These effects might not happen. How do we compare them? That's where I think certain extensions, even if they share certain premises, or even if they share certain impacts, can be important or can be enough to win the debate, or at least get a second, right? If they are able to actually analyze and present proof that these incentives or these mechanisms are in place, that they lead to the certain impacts that were described with opening government, and these examples or these matters actually substantiate them. Of course, it is still the burden of closing teams, right? To explain why not only their extension is new, but why it is better than opening government. That being said, if they are able to prove it, then I'm not particularly a fan of certain instances where just because they have a shared premise or a shared conclusion, it is automatically rehashed. I think there really are some arguments that are just better argued at closing government or closing opposition. We should be able to reward debaters for that. So for example, so just one example for how I think matter battles can be resolved or not resolved. So again, this is just randomly from Hello Motions. This house believes that it is in the interest of Germany to support EU bonds. I highly suggest you read about this because it was also involved in recent EU General Assembly discussions on how to fund coronavirus financial responses, right? So let's say a government team argues that, hey, Germany has an interest in supporting these EU-wide bonds because since these EU bonds will share the financial burden of EU-wide economic responses. So the matter here is EU bonds, meaning the European Union will collectively issue bonds or debt. Um, the EU as a whole will borrow from its people, then they can share the proceeds of those bonds among countries rather than individual countries issuing their bonds. Maybe the matter a government team uses here is, oh, Germany has the X largest GDP in EU, and they were the ones who fronted the Greek bailouts because they were so rich. Maybe an opposition team then argues, oh, Germany does not have an interest in doing this because the burden of fulfilling those bonds may eventually fall back in Germany. And maybe the matter they use is the PIGS countries, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, were the ones that had very poor debt management in the 2008 to 2010 crisis. They were the ones that crossed the crisis in Europe to begin with. We don't trust them to repay the bonds if they go south, right? So obviously, good illustration, good matter. But what did the matter not currently prove? I think there are two things, just in a hypothetical, that the matter was not able to prove. Firstly, it doesn't illustrate what the current incentives or characteristics are that indicate how countries perform for debt fulfillment. So definitely, I think there's an issue of whether Germany can trust the rest of the EU to pull their own weight. I think neither of the pieces of matter raised in the previous slide are able to prove that. At most, it just proves that Germany might be big enough to take the brunt if it does fail, versus Germany might have good suspicion to distrust the countries for not performing before, but there's definitely no analysis as to how countries generally perform or do not perform when it comes to debt fulfillment. The second thing the matter does not currently prove is the magnitude of harms to Germany should non-performance occur. Again, all the matter says is that Germany is pretty damn thick. It doesn't explain to me how large the consequences will be if it is forced to shoulder the burdens of countries that do not pay back their debt. Similarly, on opposition, while I might be able to prove an argument that some countries are not as good as Germany, it doesn't explain to me how badly they will fail if they are unable to pay those bonds. So again, there's a lot of deadlock even with that matter. What might a judge do, or what should they do? This is just an example off the top of my head. So firstly, since the motion is in the interest of Germany, then judges should first and foremost examine how teams are able to identify and prioritize Germany's interests and capabilities. All that matter it's not important unless you can actually explain what the most impactful things will be to Germany and whether or not they are worth any potential harms that are going to come to it. But secondly, judges need to be industrious in weighing out the different likelihoods and probabilities of the arguments vis-a-vis the application of matter. So like, okay, if a government side did not bring out that GDP figure or the fact that they bailed Greece's ass out during the 2008 global financial crisis, does the argument about them being big and strong like matter as much anymore? If opposition did not bring out that matter about the PIGS countries failing and jeopardizing Europe, does the general argument of Germany not wanting to face the risk of other countries performing still is it still convincing, or is it still a probability within the interest of Germany? I think those are the kinds of things that judges should be able to do and should be able to weigh out. I don't think you should be getting stuck with the fine details of the matter. It is the debater's fault that they want to get into a matter battle. But that said, you should also be smart enough to appreciate, okay, they probably bought out this matter for some reason. Is that reason sufficient to really win the argument even without that matter, or even if another piece of matter contradicts it? So that's it for my presentation. I'm free to take questions now, Tim.
Okay, just stand by while we wait for the stream to flood in with comments.
Sure. Like if you have no questions now, like just shoot me a DM or something on Facebook. I'm always just there. But yeah, like if you can ask questions now, that would be appreciated too.
Okay, here is a question.
Can you type it
Favorite.
down? Can you type it down then?
Okay, okay. I'll send it
Cool.
in chat.
uh, favorite conservatives. That's a great question. I don't know them. I would say for liberal or centrist, um, BBC, maybe Al Jazeera. I don't know what Al Jazeera's leaning is, but I just like them because yeah, they're cool. Um, yeah, so BBC and probably Al Jazeera also have an app. Like you can just download it and they'll be able to curate certain news for you. Conservative. I forget the. I'm not sure if it's National Review or something. That's what it's called. I think Washington Post also qualifies as conservative or at least center right. Again, I'm not like super well read right now. I'm sorry, but I would just suggest like ask your org mates too. I'm pretty sure there's someone in your org that's into conservative stuff or into some really liberal stuff. Don't be afraid to share each other's information. Like hoarding each other's matter or whatever, it's just not going to help your org in the long run.
All right, let's wait for more questions.
Tim, are you still there? Good.
Yep, we got another question. I will forward it right now.
Okay. Okay, is it advisable to use a piece of matter as a POI, and how should a judge appreciate it when it happens? I think it is certainly possible to use it as a piece of matter, especially if that matter, if that matter is obviously true and directly contradicts or undermines certain the argument in question, right? So let's say maybe someone is arguing about God, I need an example. Let's say that there's a certain political structure that the speaker is talking about. Oh, it's oppressive to people. Oh, it prevents them from doing this. Then maybe someone brings out this matter. Wait a minute, those kinds of systems have been abolished. The thing that you're talking about does not exist. So that's perfectly fine if it's perfectly clear that someone isn't matter loaded. How should a judge appreciate this? So I think in line with how judges generally appreciate POIs, right? So on one hand, that is a response in itself. On the other hand, I think it would be safe as well to look for further material in the in the speech of the person who raised it to say, okay, why is that POI important, or like why does that concession or thing that you exposed to the person you raised a POI to important for your case. So POIs in themselves again are quite useful if they are direct responses. That said, if we remember that matter is by and large still technically an assertion until proven in an argument, then I would say it might be better to raise different analysis or force concession uh, unless you're absolutely sure that the matter is correct, that no one is going to dispute it, uh, and that even the person who is speaking will recognize it as a fact. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, we have another one.
Okay. Do I have a litmus test? Honestly, it really is just headlines, right? I think what's most likely to appear in the front page of like Western newspapers or local newspapers, that's likely to come out anyway. Um, Obviously, it can't be updated in every country, but that's why you need a organization behind you, right? My litmus test is number one, how recently did it happen? Like, I think it would be very hard for certain ad scores to make a motion about something that happened the week before the tournament, just because things are fresh. Things are fresh is a very catch-all term. I think that just generally refers to how stable do you think the analysis is going to be if events are way too fresh and they're still happening, that we don't know what the outcomes are going to be. I think that's one thing to identify. But secondly, I think even if it passes the fact that it's not recent enough, um, does this tie in with something that happened like way before? So, like for example, I would say that the judge's motion I just raised is something that can potentially happen, right? While it might still be technically recent because Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg just died, the Republican appointee is still up for grabs or still just about to be discussed by Senate or whoever. It might be quite recent, like maybe too recent, maybe for an ABP, I don't know. But I don't think it completely precludes it because this has been a long-running issue. You know that in 2016, we had that issue about Merrick Garland. You know that in 2018, you had that issue about Brett Kavanaugh. So I think that's clearly a long-running issue. I think there are a lot of rich historical trends that don't get completely overturned just because of this one event, or if they do get overturned by this one event, I think it still fulfills a rich debate. And again, obviously, you can't be updated on every country, but that's why you can assign different org mates to talk about it and try to stay on the beat. Like literally, most of my advice would be here is you can't do everything alone. So you have to make friends with people in your org. Otherwise, they're just going to hoard matter from you. And the moment you get to a cannibalism round and they know something you don't, that is your fault because you didn't play nice.
Okay, we got another one. I will send it.
How to deal with the motion when the matter is really, really recent, such that it's hard to establish trends when everything is so volatile. So yeah, this is definitely a problem. I would say that it really is still up to the probabilities that you are comfortable or capable of proving. Like, I think an ad score is not going to set this motion if they did not think the debate community, or if they did not think they could explain the sets of probable arguments or probable contexts that are going to happen. So again, this is a bit gamey, but if ad score set it, then there is probably a set of reasonable impacts or reasonable contexts that you can argue in this motion, even if it's really volatile. Maybe they're expecting that you can tie it back with, again, something that happened in the past that is similar. And so you can deconstruct the incentives that happen in the actions that happened in the past because they're similar. Or maybe it's something that's directly the opposite of something in the past, which in that case, then you can just say, oh, in the past this happened. We prepared for that eventuality. But now because this event is happening to us, the opposite is likely to happen. So again, it's just really a matter of being prepared and understanding how certain events have happened in the past and how you can explain the probabilities of those events or their opposites.
Okay, let's give until 6:45, 6 minutes for a few more
Sure,
questions to
sure.
fill in. All right.
So again, if you're unable to ask a question now, then just you can just message me in Facebook. I wouldn't expect an immediate reply, but I'll see if I can answer your questions. That being said, like I would appreciate the questions now rather than later. Thanks.
All right, so I think we can conclude. So thank you so much, Venti, for gracing us with your loaded brains knowledge. We're very happy to be enlightened on healthy matter strategies to make rounds a bit more fun and intellectually stimulating. So, on behalf of PDU, allow me to share screen. We would like to present you with a certificate of appreciation. Thank you so much for gracing us with your time and your knowledge and your expertise on all of these things. So, a few final reminders for everybody watching and for everybody who will watch in the future. This will be edited and uploaded on YouTube, so please subscribe for more on the PDU Workshop YouTube channel. The final lecture for the debate segment of PDU Workshop 2 will happen tomorrow, so please follow the PDU page for updates on that. We will also have future segments that will happen after ABP these following 2 weekends. Let's thank Venti for the great lecture on how to be as smart as him. Venti, if you have any last words, feel free to share the stream.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And this is a shout out to Marina Lim. That's it.
All right. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys next time.